You want to know about cloud computing and cloud governance? We wrote a book. Let's talk about it. Well, welcome back to the Cloud Computing Insider. I'm Dave. Let's get going. So this is a very special podcast for me because it comes together with a long project that was being worked on for many, many months, and lots of hours went into this. And obviously, it's around the construction of a book and the ability to provide a set of knowledge that I think people need out there. You know, one of the things I noticed when I did cloud governance articles and did cloud governance courses, things like that, those are hit amazingly well. And the reason why I think it's one of those things that's understood, and people have a tendency to neglect it, and they do so at their peril, and they end up with cloud overruns, and they end up with huge complex messes of things, and they have no ability to figure out how to get and to drive how to drive governance into these systems. So guess what? Needed a book, and a book is here. So joining me as a co-author, Meredith Stein. And Meredith, it's great to have you on. I had her on my On Cloud podcast many times. I was at Deloitte. So, tell us about yourself. And obviously you were the genesis of this book. I just hopped in on the last minute and took credit. How did you come to the idea that you're going to write a book? And when did you decide to write another book? This is your second book. And what were the core motivations behind it?
Thanks, Dave. I'm excited to be here. My name's Meredith Stein, and I am a governance nerd. I also have experience in audit and internal controls. I have some board experience and also some audit experience in both the private and public sector. The genesis of the book really started with the vision of being a board member and reading some interesting questions to make me the smartest person in the room when I arrive at the board, and asking management questions about the cloud and other IT technologies. And it was the inspiration for the book. It started off as an article, and with the advent of AI, I wanted to make sure that we were keeping pace with how the cloud-enabled AI is helping businesses be a strategic differentiator. So I imagine that right now, at this very second, the listeners' organizations probably bleeding money, leaking data, and creating risks that didn't exist 3 years ago. But the worst part is that when we were doing research for our book, that's called Unlocking the Power of the Cloud, what we uncovered really scared me. You and I know the cloud is not bad. What scared me was how brilliant, accomplished leaders were making decisions every single day based on some massive misconceptions, and they're setting their organizations up for failure.
So one of the things I outlined in my book, Cloud Computing Insider, last month, it was great to jump into your book after that, because I think in the Cloud Computing Insider, I probably did more time than I should explaining the problems that we had. Overspending on cloud computing, the lack of governance, lack of control, lack of dealing with complexity modeling, things like that. And our book kind of gets into how to solve those issues, which I'm delighted for. But I saw when I was looking at, and certainly during my tenure at Deloitte and other cloud consulting gigs, just kind of massive amounts of waste that were going on because there was no control in it. And it's even going on today. And now that we're facing AI, and AI is really going to take us to the next level, we're looking for, technology to, I guess, help us solve the issue. And going forward, it just seems like something that many organizations, I think they're interested in doing, but haven't necessarily stepped forward. And we're about the 15 years into cloud computing. So why do you think there's a reluctance to looking at these core issues, putting discipline behind them, setting up organizational structures, even reading a book like the one we wrote?
And the reason why we wrote the book was because it seemed like no one was talking about, every time someone on your team asks ChatGPT a question, every time you spin up a new cloud service, or every time you think, oh, we'll figure out governance later, you're making a bet, and the odds just don't seem to be in your favor. We're seeing organizations face compliance violations, security breaches, cost overruns, like you mentioned, that could absolutely be prevented. But the good news is that you don't need to be a technology expert to fix it. And our book provides a framework about what cloud governance really means. And so that's what I'm hoping we can relay today. And as people buy our book, they'll be able to be the smartest person in the room. And we are trying to put forward a cloud governance framework for them.
Yeah, and let's get into it. So, what is cloud governance? How do you define it? How do you explain it to people who are kind of layman's in the industry, and how do you explain it to people who are maybe, cloud engineers or cloud architects?
I'm not a cloud and not a governance nerd like me. Well, we spent, as you know, a substantial amount of time researching and discussing how to best define cloud governance. And the term we landed on combines two independent domains, the cloud and corporate governance. And we help the reader understand the impact of the cloud on many governance functions, such as the board of directors, internal audit, risk assessment, incident response, cybersecurity, and we landed on one definition as the foundation and anchored it on two parts. The first is IT related. The second part's business focused. And the IT part of the definition talks about accountability and decision authority. And the key piece is about balancing value, risk, and resources. And here's where it gets really practical. And this is what I love. To bridge the definition, we introduced a practical framework that translates the business investment and control into an actionable structure for cloud governance. The book has a unique illustration that we call the cloud governance house. And this framework, the cloud house, I think helps leaders visualize beyond a messy pile of policies and compliance checklists, because I think that's what most organizations have right now, a mess. So imagine a house with me for a second, listener. The foundation of the house is the organization's, commitment to managing risk and being a good steward of its data, because that's the starting point. Now look up. Okay, we have the roof, the thing that directs everything underneath it. That's the overall company strategy, performance goals. Are we actually achieving what we can set out to do safely and effectively? Next, we go inside the house. The rooms inside the house are the key functions that have to work together. Think audit, compliance, cyber, legal. The roles change because of the cloud. So, for example, traditional audit might look at physical servers in a known location, but for cloud audit, real-time monitoring might only exist for a few minutes somewhere in a place you don't physically control. And that's the cloud governance house. It's the framework that made everything else in the book make sense.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and I thought it brings it home because it puts it into concept I think people can understand. When I say cloud governance, everybody's eyes glaze over. They just don't get it. Okay, here it is. Here comes Linthicum, the cloud nerd. He's going to tell us about governance and why it's important, and service level and macro level governance. Many of the things we, discuss in the book. But the reality is that it's a fairly scary concept, I think, for many of the enterprises out there, and certainly the global one, which is the government, who needs to get their house in order, and they don't necessarily know the first 10 steps to make it happen. And then they just go ahead and push it aside, and they move on to the next project and the next project and the next project. And there's no framework of governance in terms of how you're going to get these cloud systems and get these services that are going to be under some sort of systemic control. There's going to be a common governance control plane that goes across the various systems. So it is, something that I think that enterprises are, quite frankly, when I run into it, they're scared. In other words, they don't understand the stepwise stuff to make it happen. And one of the things I love about the book, and this is Meredith's writing, I thought was excellent, but the ability to look at this and break it down into key components and then build it up again as a solution. So you didn't just go and say, we got this problem, this is bad, this is bad. We're showing this survey, it shows how screwed up things are, yada, yada, yada. It says we're all dealing with these issues. They have different levels of impact within the organization. And here's how you solve the problem. Not just conceptually how you do it, but how you step through it. And I love the house analogy. I thought that was very that was awesome, and I learned something as I read through your writing. I think you guys will learn something as well. So next, with AI becoming central to cloud services, and it's central to everything now. It's all I deal with, and it seems like everything has been AI washed and AI systemic to everything that we touch out there. It's crazy. So what are the new governance challenges that organizations should be preparing for right now? So in other words, if AI is becoming the standard, it's going to be a force multiplier for the business. What are the governance capabilities that we should be looking at, the processes, the procedures, the disciplines, even some of the organizational changes that need to occur around the use of AI?
I love that term, the force multiplier. And certainly, as you well know, the AI-enabled cloud offers incredible transformative power. But the power is not automatic. It doesn't just happen because you sign a service level agreement with a cloud service provider. The most significant shift introducing new governance challenges is certainly the intersection of cloud and AI. Without cloud governance, you're basically swapping the known costs and inflexibility of old IT systems for unpredictable chaos and the high risks of a poorly managed cloud services. AI is accelerating transformation. We all know that. It introduces and requires governance. So, some of the things that we were thinking about and wrote in the book related to how organizations face chaos of intellectual property loss due to data leakage through Gen AI. A critical risk is certainly the introduction of malicious code that could compromise data integrity. Agentic AI, it certainly requires advancements in governance framework from static policies and adaptive controls, certainly needing the amount of oversight to making sure organizations are responsibly deploying AI. And certainly these navigation that that management needs to do to help navigate the complexity of the cloud, it introduces some challenges about shared responsibilities and vendor lock-in. And I know you and I spent a lot of time talking about shadow IT and cloud sprawl. I love this topic because if there was one takeaway, one thing from this entire conversation, here it is. An organization has to create a cloud inventory today, not tomorrow, today. A cloud inventory is your weapon against cloud sprawl, period. It
Well,
makes my
let
head.
me stop you there. What should be in that inventory? What are we inventorying? I think people are going to have a question about that.
Yeah, yeah. So the things that we think about, most people get wrong about what a cloud inventory should contain. It makes my head spin. So it's not just a list of server names. That's useless. You need hardware details, software licenses, but the critical part that nobody seems to be talking about is to know where your data is located. Geographic jurisdictions matter. Where is your data living right this second, second by second? You need to know this information. And that detailed inventory feeds directly into the security strategy because I mean, we have, look, I know we're real here, but like that's what your IT environment looks like right now. It's certainly beyond on-prem. You have multi-cloud, multiple cloud, countless third party, fourth party, fifth parties even. And that extended enterprise is absolute chaos.
Absolutely. And I think that's, you know, and the thing is, as AI becomes more pervasive, I see a trend occurring where governance is absolutely going to be imperative. In other words, as we're moving into AI, we're going into heterogeneous and complex environments. We're not going to move to a monolithic system. You know, back 15 years ago, everybody would say we're going to move everything to AWS, we're going to move everything to Microsoft, one or the other. And now multi-cloud showed up, and now we have sovereign cloud providers and neo clouds, which provide, particular AI services, things like that. And the organizations out there, certainly the ones I'm consulting with, are looking for the best bang for the buck and the ability to leverage AI in a way that's going to provide the most value back to the business, and also a way that's not going to cost 5, 6 times what I think it's costing now on some of the public cloud providers. And the reality is, I'm like, you have to get control. You have to inventory what you're doing. You have to understand the requirements, how those requirements mapped into the utilization of a service. You have to consider FinOps and how that fits in there. You have to look at the different layers of governance, that we talk about in the book, and understand the process of making it happen. And they go, well, that's too complex. We're worried about it costing us too much money. What can you do? What can you tell us as some sort of a shortcut to make it happen? I don't think there is a shortcut. But the thing is, it's not that bad. It's not going to take a huge amount of budget to get governance right within the organization. And the times when I've seen that organizations have taken it on, they've done it fairly quickly. It's been fairly effective, and it brings back 50, 60 times the amount of money that they spent to it. And it's just a no-brainer many times in making it happen. It's just not understood. It's just not valued, I think, as much as it is, because whatever reason, in the last 15 years of using cloud computing, we've been focused on, security, performance. We've been focused on, data retention, AI. We're focused on analytics and, particular technology instances like serverless and things like that. Governance was mentioned, But really, it was kind of a checklist item for about half of the organizations out there. And for the rest of the organizations, it was something that was basically an afterthought. And they had governance at the system level within the silos. They didn't have governance that was going to be at the holistically is a common control plane, a common abstraction plane. And so governance at a silo level won't do you much good. You have to have governance systemic to everything you're doing, including organizational governance and mechanisms in there. And you need to figure out where your assets are, all those sorts of things. And doing that I'll repeat again, not that difficult at the end of the day. All the problems we're trying to solve in cloud computing, this one is solvable fairly easy. You just have to put some time, energy, and money into it. Am I off?
Yes, yes. And one of the cool things that you added to the book was at the end of each chapter, we have some budget considerations for all the different facets that an organization may consider when they are adopting or maturing their cloud posture. And it is so comprehensive and this is a great playbook for people to read to get a sense about what the real costs are.
Yeah, I love that part of the book. And the thing about the book also, and of course we're advocates for the book because we wrote the book, but the thing is it's pragmatic. Many of these books that I have a tendency, edit books for publishers and things like that. And I read books for peers to write up and stuff like that. Too much abstraction, too much complexity, and certainly when you get into architecture, you get into different patterns of complexity, things like that. The reality is, you're not going to be able to use this stuff, as a value to the business unless you're able to put it into some sort of understandable framework that people can use. And I think we're kind of missing that. And, I ran with the world of architects, probably for the last, 30 years, enterprise architects, service-oriented architects, cloud computing architects, web architects, and now AI architecture, and trying to come together. The big problem I have with that community right now is they don't know how to communicate outside themselves. In other words, they know how to communicate within them, and they know how to define architectures to other architects. But at the end of the day, as I tell people in my architecture class, you need to define architecture to humans, other humans that are not architects. You need to talk to stakeholders. You need to talk to users of the system, even engineers that don't understand governance and don't understand core architectural principles. And the book does a really good job in kind of breaking those very complex topics. So let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about stakeholders. So who are the key stakeholders that should care and focus on cloud governance within the organization? I love this question because that's a common question I get all the time.
I think it totally hooks into your last statement. It's certainly an enterprise-wide perspective, right? Governance is no longer an IT problem. And there's a shared responsibility model that extends far beyond the central IT department. Every leader within the organization needs to be engaged in cloud governance, and governance starts at the top. I'm gonna say something that I think will make some board of director members uncomfortable, and honestly, I think it needs to. There's a massive mounting pressure right now for board members to get AI and cloud literate. And I'm not talking about those cute little online courses and checking a box. I'm talking about a real deep understanding about what's happening at their organization. Because here's the truth: if the board lacks a real understanding of cloud and AI, they're failing their basic duty of care. I'm gonna say that again because I think it bears repeating.
Yeah.
That board member might be failing their duty of care, and those board members have to be technical expertise, not to do the work, but to do that oversight and understand what the strategic implications are to make informed decisions and ask the right questions of management. It's not optional. This is a fiduciary responsibility, and that's what they signed up for when they took that board seat. So I think what management needs to do is stop hoping that this problem fixes itself. We give some actionable items about what management can do, such as boosting the board's digital literacy. Give the board some targeted briefings. Get an external expert in the room and teach the board about cloud and AI in plain language, to your point, David. And if there's a massive gap, consider, recruiting a board member who has that experience, because that ignorance isn't a defense, it's an absolute liability.
Yeah, and I sat on boards before for publicly traded companies, and they have somebody who's in charge of governance. But typically they're going to be an ex-executive. I think our governance person was the ex-CEO of Whirlpool. And while they're going to understand some of it, they're not going to get into the details of the technical stuff. And one of the things I've encouraged them to do was to hire outside consultants to do independent governance in terms of how you're deciding how these systems are going to be leveraged. And I've talked to my clients about that as well. So in other words, if it's important to you to have these assets under control and they need to be governed effectively, you have a fiduciary responsibility to return shareholder equity. I remember that from my finance class in college. And so at the end of the day, you also have a responsibility around the governance of the system to make sure things don't go out of kilter. And of course, in the cloud computing area, if you look at the last 15 years, things have gone way out of kilter. Not to throw mud, at people's use of cloud computing, but if you look at many of the architectures that I reviewed and I'm reviewing today, they're just not optimized. There was no optimization that was part of it. And the reason why, when you get right down to it, there's no discipline around the governance systems that they're going to leverage. And that was always, it was always struck me as something that's an avoidable issue. In other words, if you had somebody like yourself, who was working with them to understand key processes and just augment what you're doing, put some steps and checks and balances in how you're picking the technology, how you're running the technology, how you're understanding how it interacts one to another, where the value metrics are coming from, how we're defining how the business value that's coming back to the business, having a good understanding of that, it would be much better and it wouldn't take additional time. And I found out many people were going out to reInvent and other big conferences. They were taking a cell phone picture of the architecture diagrams, dragging it back and just replicating it in the industry. And they didn't need to do that. Anyway, final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there are definitely multiple people that need to get involved. The C-suite is another group of stakeholders that need to get involved. The CEO, like you said, the CFO, the CIO, they all have to figure out how they align cloud with the organization's broader business strategy. We talk about the CFO, how they need to account for costs, calculate ROI, and make sure that there are no significant cost overruns. Certainly, we've seen examples and we have some documented instances in the book that talk about how cloud costs have significantly spiraled out of control. The CIO leads the development of cloud, the strategy, the security posture, and monitors any CSP performance. But the CEO also talks about how and thinks should be thinking about the company's risk appetite and outsourcing functions to a cloud service provider. You also have the GRC functions, the governance, risk, and compliance functions, the chief risk officer, the internal audit, the external audit. So another thing that we're seeing relates to the complexities of AI and the risks that traditional audits might not be enough. And one of the exciting things that we discovered in researching for our book is that we're seeing a rise of more specialized tools. And one to watch for is called the SOC 2 Plus assessment. It builds on the standard SOC 2 security control report, but it adds specific testing for controls based on the AI Global Management Standard ISO 42001. And it digs into like 40 focused areas on AI risks like bias mitigation, ethical considerations, and transparency. So if you're deploying AI in critical ways, which you should be, consider a SOC 2 Plus report. It certainly can be a really great step in proving to your customers and regulators that AI is functional and that your organization's governing in a responsible way. The other stakeholders that we should not leave out, and there's certainly a whole section on this in the chapter in a book, is that because cloud adoption and maturation is a transformational organizational change, it demands investment in human factors. And the organizations should seriously invest in learning and development to build a cloud-enabled workforce. And I'm not just talking about the technical skills like coding or certifications, but they have to understand the principles of governance, security, and responsible use. It's a culture change. And there are learning and development interventions that can be integral into making sure that you have a cloud-enabled workforce. And the book advances several frameworks to describe what that could look like.
So our final question, I think, is probably one of the more important questions out there right now. And tell us more, tell us more about the intersection of cloud and the environment, and what are the connections that are made in the book, and kind of what's going on out there in general.
I loved writing this chapter of the book because before I started college, I had aspirations of being an environmental accountant, whatever that may have meant to me in freshman year. But I do obviously care very much about the environment, and it's certainly the impact of AI driving up demand is a significant issue for the environment. And people are going to want to read the chapter about the effects on the environment from the AI-enabled cloud. Data centers are incredibly resource hungry. They need huge amounts of electricity, and the cloud data centers need vast amounts of water for cooling. We're talking staggering amounts of water. One of the statistics we have in the book, in 2023, Google reported that its centers used 6.1 billion gallons of water. That's billion with a B. Now think about that at a user level. Asking ChatGPT, say 50 to 5 to 50 questions, that's each one is roughly the amount of water in a standard water bottle. And a water bottle for just a few queries, multiply that by millions of users asking billions of queries. That certainly brings it home about how that can be the strain on the environment. And we're also hearing certainly a lot about how that strain is on power grids, but the water usage is incredible, as you just heard. The electricity demand is enormous. And I think with demand potentially so large that only high capacity sources, we also mentioned briefly the idea about nuclear energy might also be able to help keep up with the demand.
Yeah, and I've been dealing with that, as a concept for a long period of time, and I thought it was probably handled in the book best I've ever seen it handled. I think at the end of the day, um, the reality is this: is that we don't necessarily have a capacity issue. We have a utilization issue when you get right down to how people are using these data centers, and so. I live in Northern Virginia, and so there's 100 data centers within 10 miles of me here. It's like a data center capital of the world. But if I went into any one of those data centers, which I wouldn't be allowed to go into, I wouldn't even know who would own them. But put a performance monitoring on any of the servers, I would see them at 5% capacity, 3% capacity, 2% capacity. And that's because the underutilization of those resources in the building of the system, because they're overbuying or they're underbuying or they're using architectures that are not optimized. The reality is we don't have an issue with running out of GPUs and TPUs and CPUs. We have an issue with the enterprises who are leveraging these things who are not doing it in an optimized way. And every time I've gone in to do some green audits for companies, in other words, a look at what you're doing, you're able to find or basically reduce their capacity down to 25% of where they are now. In other words, 25% fewer servers, 25% fewer, systems that are running, 25%, less water is utilized. And at the end of the day, I'm like, well, if the ones I saw are doing that, what about the ones I'm not seeing? And the reality is you don't see them all. They would tell me I'm being naive, but inefficiency is going to be built into everything, and everybody's not an expert in doing it. And so we're going to get something together that's going to work. And we just end up throwing money at the problem. We have to buy for additional capacity, things like that. I get it. And also, I understand how we got here. But the reality is, if you just loop back and put some discipline in how you do your system planning, how you do your system accounting, how you account for the costs, how you account for the utilization of power, how you account for all these sorts of things, and they're built into your governance framework, they're built into your governance methodologies, you'll be able to understand that. And by the way, the ability to optimize for the least amount of power and the ability to optimize for least amount of money are exactly the same thing. So guess what? Even if the environment may not be high on your priority list, your business success is. And companies that are able to do this are going to have additional capacity to mine more AI, to build better systems, are able to, use these things as a force multiplier for the business to bring value back to the business. And in many cases, it's going to guarantee the survivability of the business, because if they're able to utilize these resources in a way that's going to optimize the amount of value that the company's getting and minimize the amount of money and the amount of power that it's done, everybody benefits from that. We don't have to build more data centers, and those things are big monstrosities. They don't employ anybody and take a bunch of power. And it will also bring back to the company the ability to buy resources and use resources at a much lower cost, which means you can use more resources, which means people who put their pull their pockets inside out when I talk about AI is that we can't afford it because it's going to cost so much money. We don't have any piles of money. You're able to find those piles of money. You're able to reinvest that in that AI system or the analytics system or the logistics system that you need, and able to find these ways to make your business better. So it's not just about throwing technology at the issue. It's about the ability to optimize the amount of resources you have in front of you to use technology in a way that's going to maximize the value that the business sees. And that's what the business's duty is. You got to remember, back to what we talked about a minute ago, you have to be able to you have to be able to return maximum shareholder equity. That's what we do. And at the end of the day, that means running the business in a state where every dollar we spend, every server that we buy, all that sort of stuff should be utilized as much as it can be. And we're just not there right now. So sorry about the ranting, but I run into this a lot, and it confuses me. So maybe I'm just
But
not
it brings
always.
home the point of doing, governance is that green audit, right? That's an example, and it's helping a company save money and leverage that savings to put forward another another innovation.
Absolutely. Well, Meredith, I'm going to put up a QR code so people can go out and get a copy of the book. But where can my listeners, I guess your listeners too, readers, find you out there on the internet?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn, and my handle will be in the show notes. And I'm so happy, but to be here. And I just want to say something before we close out. I think this book really fills a critical gap in addressing governance as a strategic business capability rather than a technical requirement. And like you said, we're not talking about IT manuals. We're talking about strategy. And our research confirmed something that we suspected, but honestly hoped wasn't true, that there is that confusion out there. And so if you're a board member wondering if you're asking the right questions, if you're a CFO trying to figure out why your cloud costs keep exploding, if you're leading a function that touches technology, this is a conversation for you. The chaos is real. Our book's the solution. So please, please buy the book, and you're going to discover how cloud governance accelerates innovation instead of constraining it.
That's awesome. Yeah, get a hold of the book, leave us a review, let us know how you like it, and we're happy to speak with anybody who's interested in this topic, because I think it's probably one of the most important topics right now. That AI is in front of us, utilization of cloud for the for the AI workloads, and the ability to just kind of use resources in general is something that I think has escaped many enterprises out here. Reading this book will get you back on track. So give it to your boss, give it to your board of directors, give it to your CIO. Everybody should be reading this thing, because it is absolutely very succinctly written. It doesn't overwrite how we approach the concepts, but also Meredith is one of the smartest people on the planet, and you can see that in the book as well. So make sure you check it out. Well, anyway, don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out our other videos here. Also, check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, also my 120 plus LinkedIn learning courses, including my course on governance. And don't forget to check out my other course out on Go Cloud Careers, the generative AI architecture class, and give this book a try and give it a shout. It'll be the best $20 you spent, let me tell you. So anyway, until next week, you guys stay safe. Cheers.